Good afternoon. You're watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jes Delos Santos. Let's take a look at how the local bourse closed today, Monday. Okay, shares ended little moved at the start of the trading week with another last minute buying, saving the index from a fourth session in the red. You have the main index ending the day up just a little over ending the day in the green here, like what I mentioned earlier, little change there to 7,282. This as the country begins the rollout of booster shots for senior citizens and those with comorbidities. The alert level system is now also being implemented nationwide. Now, earlier in the program, we had Paul Angelo, a fund manager from the Philippine Business Bank Trust and Investment Center. He says now is the time to enter with more upside expected as we recover. He says we might see a better picture of the recovery story once fourth quarter numbers are out. Let's see, though, if that recovery will happen for the LT Group, which saw earnings plunge 38% from January to September. But despite that, you see the stock is today's best performer. It got picked up here higher by 5.5% to 10 pesos and 76 centavos a piece. You also have a number of banks here ending the day in a positive territory. You have the likes of BDO in the green here, up 1.9%. Metro Bank also increasing 1.6%. Likewise for Security Bank, adding 1.25%. But let's zero in on one stock here that's going to be Converge. Um, it was poised to finally put a stop to its 4-day retreat earlier in the day, but rising as high as 4.8%, but was unable to sustain that momentum. This, as CEO Dennis Antonio says, that Converge is in a strong position to be included in the MSCI index after the partial sale of Warburg Pincus's stake in the internet provider. That's for a total of 420 million shares. That sale boosted Converge's public float to 26% from 22.4% previously. Among the buyers, you have pension funds and insurance companies. Now, POI is expecting Warburg Pincus to sell the remaining 10.25% stake in due time. POI also expressed willingness to sell its own stake to someone who will bring the company to the next level. Now, according to COL Financial, once Converge meets the minimum free float requirement, it may be added to the MSCI as early as February. Converge, though, still ended the day in the red, down 1.4% to 30 pesos and 8 centavos a piece. Lastly, let's check in on our listed home improvement retailers. I'm talking about Vulcan and All Home, diverging paths here for both stocks as IKEA is set to open its first store in the Philippines. That's going to be on Thursday, reportedly, again, the biggest yet in its network. As you can see right here, Vulcan, represented by the white line, is up close to 0.2% to 30 pesos and 5 centavos a piece, while All Home is down close to 4% to 8 pesos and 76 centavos a share. Now, the fourth phase of the government's national action plans shows that there were slight improvements in the country's pandemic response. NEDA Undersecretary Rosemary De Leon says the country's pandemic response bagged a grade of 4.83 out of 9 in the evaluation. That's higher than the 4.42 in September. This grade was determined by measuring the country's infection management, rate of vaccine rollout, as well as its socio-economic recovery. Such an evaluation allows the National Task Force to come up with strategies for the further reopening of the economy. The NEDA is expecting the country's pandemic response to continue its improvement.
Satisfied with the numbers in October. I guess it was a matter of really, again, understanding the context, know where we came from. But us at the recovery cluster, we are quite satisfied that we have changed the policy with respect to quarantine restrictions, that we are now into granular lockdowns rather than very area-wide quarantine restrictions, that rather than closing establishments, we are just regulating yung capacity utilization of the three Cs, no? Yung crowded, close spaces and then activities that require close contact. So we're happy with the way we have been adjusting our policies that will allow for more economic activities, even as we manage the infection rates, and we also aggressively accelerate actually our vaccine rollout.
Here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The central bank expects bank lending to pick up further amid the gradual reopening of the economy. In a virtual media lecture, BSP Managing Director Zino Ronaldo Abenoa says household loans are seen to pick up together with lending for production activities. This as consumer demand improves along with the accelerated rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. In August and September, universal and commercial banks posted back-to-back increases in lending. That's after slumping for 8 straight months due to uncertainties brought about by the pandemic. Abenoa added that the recovery in bank lending can also be attributed to the aggressive monetary easing undertaken by the BSP, which includes the 200 basis point cuts in interest rates and the lowering of RRR or reserve requirement ratio. The Asian Development Bank has approved a $600 million loan to support the country's universal healthcare reform program. The loan will help finance government delivery of health services as well as monitor the performance of health service providers. ADB's Build Universal Healthcare program will expand the use of digital tools for the implementation of the UHC law. The program will also support local government access to healthcare workers and facilities, especially in underserved areas. And Finance Chief Sonny Dominguez is warning lawmakers that the proposed super rich tax could deter investments and just lead to aggressive tax avoidance schemes. In a letter sent to House Speaker Lord Alan Velasco, Secretary Dominguez said that House Bill 10253, or the proposed Super Rich Tax Act of 2021, is unlikely to boost government revenue in the long haul. Some congressmen estimate that the government could rake in up to 236.7 billion pesos a year from just 50 of the country's richest. However, the DOF said that if passed into law, the bill would generate about 57.6 billion pesos in revenue each year. Under the bill, individuals with taxable assets of more than 1 billion pesos should pay a 1% tax, while a tax of 2% is imposed on taxable assets over 2 billion pesos, and it's 3% for more than 3 billion pesos. Proceeds of the proposed tax are sought to be used for medical assistance, housing for the poor, and education, among others. Dominguez cautioned that the proposed measure would cause lost investments and reduce new jobs in the long term. He explains that businesses may be discouraged from taking on riskier ventures as they will be subject to tax liabilities on the high capital value of their assets while they generate low profits at the start of their operations. The IMF is urging the Philippine government to find ways to sustainably fund climate change mitigation and adaptation through enhanced generation of revenue. IMF representative to the Philippines, Ragnar Gudmundsson, says the country must work on increasing the budget share of investments that support the fight against climate change. The government has earlier said that it is now completing a sustainable finance roadmap which seeks to bridge policy and regulatory gaps in making investment sustainable. With this, Gudmundsson suggests the government to look into introducing greenhouse gas emissions pricing or using mechanisms such as carbon taxes or emissions trading systems. The IMF says another priority is to reduce and eliminate remaining distortionary subsidies for fossil fuels. Now, for some developing nations, economic development and the green transition may seem incompatible. Bloomberg Green breaks down how leapfrogging could kickstart sustainable economic growth.
We continue with fusion. We continue here. We're pouring our efforts into research across international lines. And I am confident, yes, that we can get there. Human beings created this problem. Human beings can solve it.
The climate crisis is a global one. Governments, think tanks and advocacy groups have now realised that it's not only an ecological disaster, but one that could have serious consequences for economic growth and development. The current debate between developed and developing nations dates back to the Industrial Revolution. Emerging economies now argue that richer nations have been able to develop because of their ability to use dirty energy. So why can't they?
It's very sad that the least developed countries are the victims of climate change more than the ones that cause it.
Environmental leapfrogging refers to the idea that industrializing or latecomer countries can bypass the dirty stages of economic growth through the use of modern technologies that use fewer resources or generate less pollution.
If you look at poor countries in development, for instance, we would like to help them with serious money to simply jump the entire fossil age and go straight into the future. Why don't we, leapfrog and don't be locked into a fossil economy that rich countries are now eventually leaving.
But there are mixed views on the effectiveness of leapfrogging.
We seem to be bringing in newer and newer demands, particularly on emerging economies. Even those who have clearly shown that we didn't wait for global finances, we didn't wait for global technologies, we didn't wait for the world to come and tell us to set up, varied sources of renewable energy, and we are moving in that direction.
I just think it's a fantastic opportunity to be clean from the start instead of having to go back and transition afterwards. We want to go green, we want to go clean, but it has to be done with our economic development plans. At the end of the day, this vicious cycle of aid all the time is what the less developing countries want to avoid. Like, give us enough money to develop on our own.
Leapfrogging isn't cheap. The African Group of Negotiators on Climate Change want $1.3 trillion a year. This is to help the continent make the green transition and protect their economies from the worst impacts of global warming.
Funding and financing is critical, and we're hoping that this year takes that turn to have proper money and proper investment into a clean energy transition in line with Paris.
At COP26, rich nations pledged to provide $8.5 billion to help South Africa reduce its dependence on coal. Eskom, the country's state-owned power utility, welcomed this news.
Eskom will need between $30 and $35 billion to make this energy transition a just one, and also for us to invest in all the various component parts of our business to make the transition from coal to a lower carbon footprint. But the important contribution is going to come from governments and developmental financing institutions to help us with concessional lending so that we can accelerate this energy transition and decarbonize our economy faster.
The announcement that was made to support South Africa, which is the largest pollutant in Africa, with $8.5 billion from the UK, France, the US, the EU, again, huge steps going forward.
But would that be enough to help in the race towards net zero?
We're still living in a world where, the gamers in California use the same amount of energy as the country of Senegal.
138 developing countries put language in the text yesterday. It got removed overnight. It's not there anymore. It's been replaced by an offer for a dialogue. That's all they want to do, a dialogue.
Disappointing?
Absolutely disappointing and totally unacceptable.
Does that make
unacceptable.
This whole act a failure?
Sorry?
Does this make this whole agreement a failure?
As far as I'm concerned, it is a failure.
And those are the biggest stories this trading day, November 22, 2021. Catch Business World live again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. for the market open and 3:15 p.m. for the market close. I am Jes Delos Santos, and we are One News. Mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines.